In the middle of the 20th century, Venezuela was not a poor country struggling to survive. It was one of the richest nations on earth. Beneath its soil lay oceans of oil, proven reserves larger than Saudi Arabia, black gold so abundant that it reshaped the nation's destiny before most Venezuelans even understood what they were sitting on. By the 1950s and 1960s, Venezuela had become the wealthiest country in South America by a wide margin. Its currency, the bolivar, was one of the strongest in the world, stronger than the Japanese yen, stronger than the Italian lira, stable, trusted, respected. Caracas looked nothing like the stereotypes associated with Latin America decades later. It was a modern, vibrant capital filled with skyscrapers, highways, theaters, and luxury boutiques. European immigrants arrived in waves, fleeing post-war poverty and devastation not to escape Venezuela but to build new lives there. Italians, Spaniards, Portuguese, Germans. They came because Venezuela offered opportunity, stability, and wealth. By the 1970s, Venezuelans enjoyed a standard of living higher than much of Europe. Imported cars filled the streets. Middle-class families traveled abroad regularly. Shopping malls stocked with foreign goods became symbols of prosperity. The country earned a nickname that captured the national mood: Saudi Venezuela. Oil paid for everything: schools, hospitals, infrastructure, subsidies. The state didn't need to tax its people heavily. The oil money flowed endlessly, or so it seemed. Governments changed, but the oil remained, and as long as oil prices stayed high, the illusion of permanence held. But beneath the surface, the economy was fragile. Venezuela did not build wealth the way industrial nations did. It did not diversify. It did not create strong domestic manufacturing. Agriculture withered as food imports became cheaper than local production. Why grow crops when oil could buy them cheaper from abroad? Why invest in factories when dollars flowed effortlessly from underground? The economy became a single pillar holding the entire nation upright. Oil was not just the main export, it was the economy. And when an economy depends on one thing, it becomes vulnerable to whoever controls that thing. By the late 20th century, inequality remained visible despite the wealth. Oil money flowed unevenly. Corruption became normalized. Political elites treated the state as a prize rather than a responsibility. Yet as long as oil prices remained high, the system survived. The middle class expanded. Poverty declined slowly. The warning signs were there, but they were drowned out by cash. Then in 1998, everything changed. Hugo Chavez rose to power on a wave of anger, resentment, and promises. He did not invent Venezuela's problems. He inherited them, but he offered something powerful: a simple explanation and a simple solution. The country was rich, he said. The people were poor because corrupt elites had stolen what belonged to everyone. The answer was redistribution, control, justice through the state. Millions believed him. At first, the results seemed miraculous. Oil prices surged in the early 2000s. The state took greater control of the oil industry. Revenue exploded. Chavez used the money to fund massive social programs: free healthcare, free education, subsidized food, direct cash transfers. Poverty fell rapidly. Literacy programs expanded. Clinics appeared in poor neighborhoods almost overnight. To many Venezuelans, this felt like proof that the old system had failed them, proof that socialism worked, proof that the state, when empowered, could deliver prosperity faster than markets ever could. But what looked like progress was actually consumption. The government was not building a productive economy. It was spending oil revenue faster than ever before. Private businesses were increasingly regulated, restricted, or nationalized. Price controls were imposed to make food and goods affordable. Currency controls were introduced to stop capital flight. The state decided who could buy dollars and at what rate. On paper, everything looked controlled. In reality, the incentives were breaking. Price controls meant producers could not cover costs. Farms shut down, factories slowed production. Shelves began to thin, not because of shortages of money but shortages of production. Currency controls created black markets. Two prices emerged: the official rate and the real rate. Corruption exploded as insiders gained access to cheap dollars they could resell for massive profit. Oil masked these failures. As long as oil prices stayed high, the government could import food instead of producing it. It could print money without immediate consequences. It could silence critics with subsidies and wages paid by oil revenue. But this system required one thing above all else: high oil prices. When oil prices collapsed in the mid-2010s, the illusion shattered. Suddenly, the government could no longer afford imports. The state-owned oil company, mismanaged and hollowed out by political appointments, saw production collapse, refineries decayed, skilled workers fled, output plummeted. To cover the gap, the government printed money. And printed more. And more. Inflation surged, then accelerated, then spiraled beyond comprehension. The bolivar, once one of the strongest currencies in the world, began to evaporate, prices doubled, then doubled again, salaries became meaningless within weeks, people were paid in stacks of bills that couldn't buy bread. Supermarkets emptied, not because food didn't exist globally but because no one would accept worthless currency in exchange for real goods. Medicine disappeared, hospitals collapsed, power outages became routine, water systems failed, oil-rich Venezuela experienced fuel shortages. The collapse was not gradual, it was violent. Professionals fled en masse, doctors, engineers, teachers, millions crossed borders on foot. One of the largest peacetime migrations in modern history unfolded silently across South America. The nation that once attracted immigrants became a nation of refugees. This was not caused by sanctions alone. It began long before them. It was not caused by bad luck. It was caused by a system that destroyed incentives, production, and trust, then tried to replace them with control and money printing. By the time the government admitted there was a crisis, the economy no longer functioned. Money had lost meaning. Trust had vanished. And the richest country in South America stood hollowed out, its wealth buried underground, unreachable by a system that had destroyed its own ability to use it. But the worst part of Venezuela's collapse wasn't the empty shelves or the worthless currency. It was what came next. Because once trust is gone, rebuilding an economy is no longer an economic problem. It becomes a human one. By the time the collapse became visible to the outside world, Venezuela's economy had already been destroyed from the inside. Money still existed, but it no longer functioned as money. Prices changed daily, sometimes hourly. Workers rushed from their jobs to stores the moment they were paid, knowing their wages would lose value before sunset. Cash became so abundant and so worthless that it was carried in backpacks, trash bags, and boxes. Counting bills took longer than earning them. ATMs stopped working because there was no point in dispensing currency that could not buy anything. The government responded the only way it knew how. More control. More regulations. More printing. Price controls were tightened. Hoarding laws were enforced. Businesses were threatened, seized, or shut down for charging unfair prices that reflected reality rather than official fantasy. Shelves emptied faster. Producers stopped producing altogether. Why sell goods at a loss? Why accept money that could not replace what was sold? Food lines became a feature of daily life. People waited for hours under the sun, hoping shipments would arrive. Sometimes they did, often they didn't. Soldiers guarded supermarkets. Ration cards determined who could buy what and how often. Families adjusted to diets stripped of protein and variety. Children lost weight. Elderly people weakened quickly. Hospitals collapsed quietly. Doctors continued working without supplies. Surgeries were postponed indefinitely. Antibiotics vanished. Cancer treatments stopped. Electricity outages interrupted life support machines. Water shortages turned basic hygiene into a luxury. The country with the world's largest oil reserves could not keep hospital lights on. As systems failed, people adapted. Barter returned, food replaced currency, medicine became treasure. A sack of rice was worth more than a monthly salary. A box of antibiotics could buy favors, services, or protection. In rural areas, communities reverted to subsistence farming. In cities, scavenging became common. Garbage bags were searched not out of desperation but necessity. The bolivar continued collapsing until it lost all connection to value. The government introduced new banknotes, then replaced them, then removed zeros, then removed more. None of it mattered. Inflation did not slow because inflation was no longer the problem. The problem was belief. No one trusted the currency, no one trusted prices, no one trusted tomorrow. The oil industry, once Venezuela's crown jewel, decayed into ruin. Years of mismanagement, corruption, and political purges hollowed it out. Skilled engineers were replaced with loyalists. Maintenance budgets vanished. Infrastructure rusted. Production fell year after year until Venezuela, sitting atop unimaginable reserves, could barely extract enough oil to power itself. The state that once paid for everything could no longer pay for anything. International isolation followed. Sanctions tightened the pressure, but they did not cause the collapse, they accelerated it. By the time sanctions arrived, the system was already broken, capital had fled, trust was gone, the economy no longer produced. Millions left. Families split across borders, parents sent children ahead, professionals walked for days to reach neighboring countries. Venezuelans became migrant laborers, cleaners, delivery drivers, and construction workers across the continent. They sent money home when they could, but even foreign currency struggled against the black hole of inflation. Those who stayed learned new rules of survival. Dollars replaced bolivars, informal dollarization took over markets. Shops accepted US bills discreetly, prices were whispered, transactions happened quietly, the state pretended not to see what it could not control. An economy functioned in the shadows while the official system rotted. The social fabric tore apart, crime surged, then fell, then surged again as populations shifted, trust between citizens eroded, informants became common, fear replaced solidarity, survival narrowed perspectives, long-term thinking disappeared, people stopped planning futures, they planned weeks, days, meals. The promise that once powered the revolution collapsed completely. The state could not provide prosperity. It could barely provide order. Years passed, governments changed faces but not structures. Attempts at reform were partial, hesitant, constrained by fear of admitting failure. Any real reform would require revering the very policies that had defined the revolution. That meant political suicide. So nothing fundamental changed. Venezuela became trapped. Too broken to function as it once had. Too politically frozen to rebuild properly. Too rich in resources to fully collapse. Too poor in trust to recover. This is the paradox of Venezuela. The collapse did not destroy the country physically. Cities still stood, oil still slept underground, people still worked, traded, and lived. But the invisible machinery that makes a nation function, trust, incentives, credibility, was gone. And rebuilding those takes longer than rebuilding bridges or refineries. They take generations. By the time inflation slowed, not because it was fixed but because money had been abandoned, Venezuela was no longer the country it once was. It had become a warning. A warning that wealth without production is temporary. That redistribution without incentives consumes itself. That printing money can delay reality but never defeat it. And that the most dangerous collapse is not economic collapse. It is the collapse of trust between a people, their money, and their future. Because once that trust is gone, even the richest country in South America can fall into poverty, quietly, completely, and for a very long time. In the years that followed the collapse, Venezuela entered a strange limbo. The disaster was no longer accelerating, but it was no longer ending either. The country existed in a suspended state, neither alive nor fully dead, moving forward without momentum and backward without repair. The economy did not recover, it adapted. Dollar bills quietly replaced the bolivar in daily life. Prices were written in chalk, erased, rewritten. Salaries were negotiated informally, sometimes paid partly in cash, partly in food. Street vendors accepted foreign currency without comment. Entire neighborhoods operated on unofficial exchange rates that changed by the hour. The government tolerated the shadow system because it had no alternative. Enforcement would have meant strangling what little life remained. The bolivar became ceremonial. It still existed, still circulated, still appeared in official statistics, but no one trusted it. Money without trust is not money, it is paper with numbers. Oil production stabilized at a fraction of its former capacity. Decades of neglect could not be undone quickly. Skilled workers who left did not return. Refineries that rusted did not magically revive. Investment avoided the country. Not because opportunity didn't exist, but because predictability didn't. No one builds long-term projects where rules can change overnight. The middle class, once the backbone of Venezuelan society, was shattered. Some emigrated, some fell into poverty, some survived by attaching themselves to the dollar economy. Social mobility froze. A generation grew up knowing only instability, shortages, and improvisation. Education suffered lasting damage. Universities lost professors. Students dropped out to work or leave the country. Knowledge drained outward, never to return. Healthcare remained fragile. Infrastructure decayed slowly but relentlessly. Roads cracked, power grids failed repeatedly, water systems deteriorated. These were not dramatic collapses, they were quiet erosions. The state continued to speak the language of control, but it no longer controlled much of anything. Markets obeyed reality, not policy. People learned that survival required ignoring official narratives. Trust between citizens and institutions was not merely damaged, it was severed. This was the deepest wound. A functioning society requires belief. Belief that tomorrow will be better than today, belief that effort will be rewarded, belief that rules apply consistently. Venezuela lost all three. Children grew up watching parents work without progress. They learned that talent did not guarantee success, honesty did not guarantee safety, and loyalty did not guarantee stability. Cynicism replaced hope. Emigration became the default ambition. Survival became the goal. Decades earlier, Venezuela had been a country that attracted dreamers. Now it produced them and exported them. Historians would later argue about causes. Some would blame ideology, others corruption, others foreign pressure, others bad leadership. All would be partly right, but none of these explanations alone captured the truth. The collapse was systemic. An economy built on a single resource learned to believe that production did not matter. A political system learned that control could replace incentives. A society learned that consumption could replace creation. And when the money ran out, there was nothing underneath. Oil wealth had delayed reality, not defeated it. The tragedy of Venezuela is not that socialism failed there. It is that the country never built the foundations required for any system to succeed. No system survives when it destroys incentives, replaces trust with control, and treats wealth as permanent rather than conditional. By the time reforms became politically possible, the damage was already cultural. People no longer believed in institutions. Rebuilding infrastructure was easier than rebuilding faith. Rewriting laws was easier than restoring confidence. Stabilizing prices was easier than restoring hope. And hope once lost returned slowly. Today, Venezuela remains a paradox. Incredibly rich in resources, incredibly poor in outcomes. A nation where oil pumps rise from the ground like monuments to unrealized potential. A country that had everything required for prosperity except the systems that sustain it. The collapse did not happen overnight. It unfolded through years of small decisions, each rationalized, each defended, each justified as temporary, until temporary became permanent, until emergency became normal, until survival replaced ambition. This is how nations fall without war. Not through invasion. Not through famine alone. But through the slow erosion of trust between people and the systems meant to serve them. Venezuela's story is not unique. It is a warning. Wealth does not guarantee success. Resources do not guarantee stability. Intentions do not override incentives. And control cannot substitute for production. A country can survive poverty. It cannot survive the belief that reality can be commanded into submission. Because in the end, reality always collects its debt. And when it does, even the richest nation in South America can be left with nothing but memory, migration, and the quiet understanding of what was lost.